I think one of the main things I think that I would like people to realize from this is that breathing is one of the things that we take for granted, right? So it's something that we want to make people aware of, that this thing of just breathing normally is just a gift of the Ribbono Shel Olam.
Exactly. It's interesting to note that breathing sometimes is sort of something that we can control. You can breathe faster if you want, and you can, hold your breath if you want, so to speak. It's not something like the heart that you could stop your heart, voluntarily.
Right.
But then again, only up to a point, right? If you're short of breath, if there's something wrong, then you will start breathing fast involuntarily. And you can hold your breath up to a point also, and then automatically the body kicks in. Your brain tells you must breathe. The air travels through a bigger tube, and then just like a tree, you start at the trunk, right, and it's thicker, and then you have the branches, and they narrow out all the way out to the small twigs at the end. Well, that is exactly why we call this a bronchial tree, because that's exactly what happens. And all the way at the very end, they become very minuscule, all right? And that is the area where the blood travels through, and that is where most of the exchange of the gases, of the carbon dioxide and the oxygen, occurs. Anything that can affect this, all right, will affect how well we can breathe. And it's very important to preserve that. The diaphragm is a muscle that's below the lungs, and it divides the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. And the way it works is that's basically what creates the process of breathing. In that, air goes in and out. What causes the air to go in and out of the lungs? It's a change of pressure. So what happens when the diaphragm moves a certain direction, it creates what we call a negative pressure. It reduces the pressure in the lung so that air rushes in. When the diaphragm moves in the opposite direction, it increases the pressure, and that causes the air to be pushed out of the lungs. So this diaphragm, this muscle that runs across the entire body, all right, below the lungs, moving up and down, right, is basically what allows us to do our breathing, allows us to have the air moving in and out. There's also a process of protecting the lungs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, that we eat, right? And it goes through into the same mouth. And yet, in most cases, right, it's normal that none of that goes into our lungs. Our airways were created with protection, all right? So that things that don't belong there don't go there, right? That epiglottis, right? And it's automatic.
That's why you're not supposed to talk during a meal.
Exactly, right. We speak, right? So the vocal cords, by the way, that allow us to form our voice are in the airways, because we talk by pushing air out of the lungs past these two small little muscles that vibrate, and that causes our voice. It causes sound to come out. Well, there's also a covering over the airway called the epiglottis. What happens is when we eat, that closes up the airway so that the food goes into the food pipe, the esophagus. Right. And does not go into the lungs. It's happened to everybody sometime where something goes down the wrong way. A little water, a little liquid they drink. And what happens is that it's a very strong defense mechanism. We start coughing violently because the lungs don't want anything down there that doesn't belong. So we cough it out. Well, when you're talking, right, you can't talk if the airway is closed by the epiglottis. So the epiglottis has to open up in order to let the air out to force a voice. And if you're eating at the same time, then what happens is that it increases the risk of food going into the lungs. It's important that when one leans while they're eating, such as what we do when we do the Seder night, that it's safer to lean towards the left and not towards the right. That tends to also have to do with to prevent food from going into the lungs while we're leaning on our side.
You have a reputation of being very outspoken against young fellows or anybody actually smoking because of lung disease. I was wondering what gave you that impetus to be so outspoken about it.
Well, the lungs are what bring in the food of the body. We all live on oxygen, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and He gave us free food. We have as much as we want, and we bring that in through our lungs, and the oxygen goes into the blood, and it's exchanged for carbon dioxide. One of the most fascinating things is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, in that where do we get so much oxygen, and what happens to the carbon dioxide? Well, he created the trees and the plants. They use the carbon dioxide that we produce, and they give forth oxygen so that we have more to breathe. If we block that process and we poison it, then we're poisoning our body, and we no longer can live. Cigarettes contain multiple hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poisons. It's no different than going to the back of an exhaust of a bus and putting your mouth to it and breathing in everything that comes out of it. And it affects every part of the body. It affects the immune system, the system that prevents us from getting infections. It causes Rahman al cancer, lung cancer, stomach cancer. It affects the heart and causes heart attacks. It causes strokes. It causes stomach problems. It causes circulation problems. There's not one aspect of the body that is mentioned in this wonderful CD that's being produced that is not affected by cigarette smoke in a bad way.